Hello, welcome to Boxing News' podcast, The Opening Bell. I'm Tris Dixon, the editor, joined by Matt Christie. Matt, how are things?
Not bad, busy day. I haven't actually eaten yet today.
Do you know what? It's funny you should say that. I just had a really nice lunch out there.
Really?
Yeah,
that's
full
good.
to the brim.
So how are you?
Do you know what? You shouldn't even get me started on that this week. It's been a bit of a shocking week, to be honest. I don't know if you guys have seen Glyn Leach's editorial in Boxing Monthly. It's probably about where I am at the minute. You know what? People talk about the editor's job at Boxing News being like a dream job, and it is. There are perks. 5% of the time, it's a brilliant job. 95% of the time, it is really, really difficult. There's a lot to do. It's non-stop. I know all of our workloads are exceptionally hefty. I can't remember a weekday when I did less than 14 hours. I would like to try, but I can't think that far back. So yeah, pretty exhausting, really. And you know what I was thinking with Glyn? Glyn, I think he says in his editorial this week, and I spoke to Glyn yesterday. We talk from time to time. He was saying that I think he's the longest serving editor or has had the longest consecutive run of years in editing boxing magazines, certainly in the UK, which might be right, because I think John Murray, who founded Boxing News, had 3 stints altogether at Boxing News, totaling 25 years. Harry Mullen did 19 years at the helm. And then there was a few others sort of who were in and about in a couple of stints. I think Claude and Tim Riley had 12 years each. In terms of editions that Glyn's put out, 20 years or 20 plus years at 12 issues a year, and I think I'm at 5 years putting out 51 issues a year. It's taken a toll, man. I'm serious, Matt. My hair will be shorter than yours soon.
That's impossible. Oh, well, I'm glad I asked anyway.
Yeah.
Just a cheery opening, isn't it? You can tell us a joke.
Should we redo it? Knock.
Who's there?
Man, I'm too tired to even get the bloody door. I don't know, mate. I don't know anymore. All I do know, actually, on a positive note, let's change things up a bit. On a positive note, I cannot wait for this weekend of fights.
Yeah.
There's some really cracking stuff. We've got a jam-packed issue this week. A couple of noteworthy things include the big preview of Ricky Burns against Terence Crawford, and we have a fascinating interview by Don McRae with Ricky Burns, the rewired, unbreakable version of Ricky Burns. Really good stuff in there. But Matt, Crawford-Burns this weekend. Big fight, isn't it? And Ricky is hardly in the form of his life.
No, considering potentially this on paper is his toughest defence that he's encountered across his 2 reigns. He's not going into it in peak form, is he? A year or so ago, or perhaps a bit longer than that, when we were talking about potentially a fight against Adrian Broner, Ricky was coming off the back of a really impressive win against Kevin Mitchell, and a few people were giving him a chance of possibly upsetting Broner. But it's funny now, two subpar performances, and the vast majority are favouring Crawford for this.
Are you favouring Crawford?
Probably, to be honest, yeah. I think I am. I mean, from what I've seen of Crawford, he's an impressive operator, slick boxer. We've seen Ricky have problems against that type in the past, and had his bad run been just one fight and he'd put it right against Beltran, then perhaps we would be saying it was an aberration. But the fact he struggled twice, is kind of giving an indication that perhaps Ricky Burns' time at the top is coming to an end.
It's a tough fight to call because Crawford hasn't fought away from the States, and he certainly hasn't fought in an environment that's going to be as hostile as Glasgow on Saturday night.
No, he hasn't. But he's come over to the UK. I don't think he's won many friends since he's been here. But the other side of that is that he doesn't particularly seem overawed at this point. However, it will be different when he's doing his ring walk, and there will barely be a supporter of him in the whole arena.
John Simpson, John Murray on the undercard. Two guys who haven't really got their just dues over the years in terms of providing punters with value for money. John Simpson, John Murray was a headline act for a while, had a good run with Mick Hennessy. Then he lost to Kevin Mitchell and lost to Brandon Rios on a big fight in New York. John Simpson is a guy who has always seemed to be one or two fights away from a really, really big fight. But he's always in tough, entertaining contests, though, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. It's not long ago that Simpson was, I think he was ranked by the IBF in the top 10, and there was talk of a world title shot. And, perhaps he hadn't quite done enough to deserve that, but it would have been nice. He's one of those fighters where you think perhaps that they deserve it.
Just services rendered sort of thing,
exactly. But yeah, to me, it's a fan-friendly fight. We still don't really know how much more of John Murray is left. He may still, his peak years may still be ahead of him, but he has had a run of tough fights. But the jury is still out with John Murray. We've got an interview up on the website where he's talking about that he's got to win impressively here. If he doesn't, then he can't make any more claims to like 20 more world title shots. And he wants to fight with Anthony Crolla, which for many reasons would be a fascinating encounter.
Talking of fascinating encounters, anyone in boxing will be wide awake at about 4 a.m. on Saturday night, and all eyes will be on the Alamodome in San Antonio, Texas. Not just to see Chavez Vera 2. In fact, far from seeing Chavez Vera 2, I'd imagine most people will be wanting to get a glimpse of this extraordinary talent that's Vasyl Lomachenko, who's fighting for a world title in his second professional fight, depending on whether you count the WSB fights or not, against Orlando Salido, who we know all about as a tough guy.
Yeah.
Lomachenko, if he's to pull this off against Salido, it's some feat, isn't it?
It will be a huge feat. Salido, he's not in any pound for pound lists. He's he's not regarded as one of the most talented world champions out there, but he's certainly not the worst champion. He's certainly not a weak champion. And full credit to Lomachenko for going for this fight this early in his career. If he loses, where does he go? His career could be over after 2 professional fights, because you would think that if he did lose to Orlando Salido, it would be a punishing affair. And where does he go from there? Flip side of that is, you suspect that if people were absolutely convinced that Lomachenko was going to be successful in this fight, it would not have been made.
It is intriguing. Looking at the main event, also Chavez Vera, do light-heartedly look over it, because obviously Vera was on the wrong end of a pretty nasty decision last year against Chavez. You get the feeling now that Chavez will show up. You think this time and again, but will show up this time in shape, leave nothing to chance, and stake his claim for a big, meaningful fight at 168 pounds, where he's ranked number 1 by the WBC, extraordinarily, having never fought the weight. We can go back to that in a minute, or a bit later on. But Chavez Vera, you know what? For all the criticism Chavez gets, and he gets it, and he deserves it, he can fight, and he's a lump at the weight. He's got a good chin. He sticks around. He's durable, and I don't like him or dislike him. Don't know him personally, but I think that last round with Sergio Martinez, I think that was the one of the most mesmerising things I've seen in 10 or 15 years of boxing. I think there's only 2 times I remember leaping out of my seat involuntarily at home in boxing in the last few years, certainly since joining the staff at Boxing News back in 2007, 2 million issues ago. But this fight, Chavez and Martinez, that last round was just amazing. And you know, the guy can't be that bad if he's giving Sergio Martinez nightmares in the 12th round of a title fight, especially after he'd taken and paced him for 11 rounds. So credit where it's due. He should have too much for Vera. Where he goes from there will be interesting, whether or not they're going to sort of shoehorn him down the Andre Ward route, which is a fight that's been talked about. Ward's told us before he likes that fight because it's a pay-per-view fight. So we'll see. I mean, I don't think he's anywhere near Ward's league. But talking about super middleweights, though, Matt, James DeGale boxes in Bristol. Now, I don't want to ask you the conventional stuff. You know, we've got the preview in the magazine. James DeGale, is he ready to fight Carl Froch or George Groves, the winner?
Yeah.
And you say that based on... I'm not disagreeing, by the way. I'm just...
But no, I just think here's what he's... Okay, he hasn't got a top 10 guy. He hasn't beaten a top 10 guy, but neither had George Groves, with the perhaps the exception of James DeGale. That fight was nip and tuck. I watched it again recently, the James DeGale-George Groves fight. You can make an argument that DeGale won that. You can make an argument that Groves deserved the decision. DeGale, I don't think, has regressed since then. I think perhaps he's found motivation tricky, but he's pretty much dominated everybody with the exception of the guy that he fought for the European title in the immediate fight after Groves. But to me, DeGale has got bags of talent. I think he's one of those guys that you will see, if he was to get a world title fight, up his game to something we hadn't seen before.
Okay, interesting. There's a rematch further afield. Arthur Abraham, Robert Stieglitz this weekend. Stieglitz won last time where he caused Abraham's eye to close, was peppering him with shots, really. Abraham never found his top form at super middleweight, really. How do you see it going?
I mean, with what happened in the last fight, and that last fight, by the way, was massive. You know, it was a shock to me. Not the fact that Stieglitz won it, but just the manner in which he did.
He really went out and bossed it, didn't he?
Yeah. But yeah, I think you've got to favour Stieglitz on if the evidence is the most recent fight they've had, and that is, you know, you'd have to favour Stieglitz. But kind of going back to James DeGale, I would pick James DeGale over both of those guys. Okay,
interesting. Okay. Okay, action this week. There was a fun show in Hull last weekend. What?
No, there was. Yeah, I was laughing in acknowledgement of my memories of what a great time I had watching it.
I thought you were about to say what a great time you had last weekend. We're not even going to go down that road. And it saw Curtis Woodhouse crowned British champion after upsetting Darren Hamilton. Great story. You spoke to Curtis this week.
Yeah, he was understandably still on cloud nine when I spoke to him. It's a wonderful story. Curtis Woodhouse that he set out to do this, the promise he made to his dad while his dad was on his deathbed, and everything else, and the amount of times that he has been written off along the way. And he thought, we thought he'd found his level several times when he lost to Journeyman, when Derry Matthews stopped him in 4 rounds. And I must admit, I thought that this would be a fairly routine defence for Darren Hamilton. And Woodhouse, he was impressive, but it was a really, really, really close fight. But there is a part of me now that hopes that Woodhouse does, he's promised he's going to retire in the aftermath, in the lead up. When he spoke to me on Monday, he was still adamant that retirement was the option, and that would be a perfect story. But boxing is not littered with perfect stories.
Give me a taste of what he was saying, or what people can find in the interview that you did with him online. Cause it's a longer piece. Tell me, what are the 2 highlights?
It was quite funny. He was talking about the preparation he'd done. He'd been sparring with Andy Lee. He'd been sparring with Nathan Cleverly. He felt great, and then 10 days before the fight, he got in with bantamweight Ross Birkinshaw, and within about 10 seconds of that spar, Birkinshaw, I think he said, caught him with a left or a right hook, and immediately Woodhouse's eye was almost swollen shut, and he was concerned that the fight would be cancelled, would be called off at the last moment because of that. The way he told the story was a lot better than I'm doing now, a lot more enjoyable. But hopefully you'll get a flavour of what he was like if you read the piece, because I did transcribe it word for word, the whole interview, which is on. What about this?
Do you think Woodhouse has had enough credit this week?
What?
Do you think Woodhouse has had enough credit?
Enough credit?
Yeah, on his phone.
Oh, I see. Yeah, no, that was something else as well. That was something else, which was funny because we were chatting away, and then the line went dead, and I phoned him back about 2 minutes later, and he'd actually run out of credit. And the thing is, the amusing thing about that is that just before the line went dead, he was telling me that money was not an option. You know, if somebody offered him £1 million, he doesn't need £1 million. He wouldn't come back out of retirement for that. But although he doesn't need it, he still hasn't got enough money to keep his phone in credit.
Okay. Funny you mentioned Ross Birkinshaw. I was going through some of my old boxing stuff on Saturday night, digging out pictures for a book I'm working on, and I found a boxing program from one of my amateur fights, and I think it was either one in '98 or one in 2000, and it was down in Devon, and Ross Birkinshaw was on the same bill.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and John Fuchs was on that show as well.
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress. Also in Hull, Tommy Coyle was involved in an absolute thriller with Daniel Brizuela. It was a really controversial ending given what went before. Referee Steve Gray called a halt. And both guys had been right through the mill, and Brizuela wasn't in as bad a shape as I think Coyle was in the 5th or 6th round. Whenever it was, he was really damaged by body shots. What's your take on the fight? Full stop, really, rather than the stoppage per se.
It was a brilliant fight. You know, take my hat off to both guys for performing and going above and beyond what the vast majority of us could. But you know, I said it about the George Groves Carl Froch fight. You know, people were kind of putting that fight and rating it as one of the best in British history. But when you have an ending that's so unsatisfactory, it takes some of the gloss off what came before. And to me, it's that kind of situation with this Tommy Coyle fight. I don't want to take anything away from Tommy Coyle, because the way he rebounded from body shots particularly was extremely impressive. But the ending left a sour taste.
Yeah, you're right. I think I don't know why there hasn't been more made of that ending though, because it was close on the scorecards as well. Yeah,
exactly. I'm not sure, but you don't want to say it's a hometown thing or anything like that, but you can understand why somebody from the outside, who's not from this country, looking in, would take that as a controversial thing.
If you were to flip it and that was Tommy Coyle and it was stopped, it would have been an outrage.
Yeah, of course there would. There would.
Difficult to see. I mean, it would be nice for them to do it again, but obviously Coyle straight away was shouting about Kevin Mitchell, and who wouldn't want to see that as well? Although, you know, Kevin Mitchell, I know a few people would think Kevin's a level or two above Tommy Coyle, but we've seen it before. Kevin Mitchell, who's meant to be, or who can box smoothly and can box nicely, sometimes gets drawn into a tear-up, and that's what Tommy Coyle does. He drags people in. Yeah,
you would have to favour Mitchell, but yeah, no, Tommy Coyle is. I'm not sure he's going to get to world level. It'd be foolish of anybody to write him off with what he's achieved so far. But you know, let's also not forget that was a punishing fight, a really, really punishing fight, which somewhere along the line will have an effect. And also the Derry Matthews knockout in the final round was a pretty horrific ending. And you do wonder if these sort of things will have an effect on Tommy Coyle moving forward.
How long you can keep going to the well and so forth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yesterday I watched Frank Warren's show, and I saw Tony Conquest beat Daniel Aman, and I saw Chris Eubank Jr. Conquest boxed quite well. He's now the Commonwealth light heavyweight champion. I would like to see him have a rematch with Dawson.
Yeah.
I think I did say light heavyweight, it's cruiserweight champ.
Yeah.
I'd like to see him have a rematch with Dawson. Who's got a title defence coming up? Is it John Lewis Dickinson later on in the month? So the winner of that, I'd like to see Conquest have a go at. And you know, as a guy who came up with Eubank, Ben, all those guys, you know, it's an involuntary reflex when the hairs go up on the back of your neck, but I still get that watching Eubank Jr. strut down the ring to simply the best, vaulting over the top rope and stuff. You know, you can't control that stuff. And Eubank Jr. wasn't he didn't deliver emphatically in the ring, but he certainly got the job done, and there was enough there to think there could be some real talent. There's just no need to rush the guy. He's 13-0, 8 stoppages. They're talking about maybe a British title fight next year, and I think by then he'll be, 20-0 if all goes to plan this year, and that's probably about where he needs to be.
Yeah, I agree. I think he has got a lot of talent. It's still far too early to say how far he'll go. But you mentioned hair standing on the back of the neck. I was there, and he made his debut on a Tyson Fury undercard, and I was ringside for that. And, it was completely surreal, because I think on that night he was also wearing the gold trunks, and it was bizarre. It was bizarre to see it. But he's got a different. You can see a lot of mannerisms, a lot of things that he does similar to his dad, but he's also got his own style. I think he'd be a handful for a lot of people at British level in his weight class, but I'm certainly not thinking that he's going to rule the world just yet.
His dad had a granite chin, and he could also take someone out with one punch. Eubank Jr. shown he can take a shot, but albeit not from a top level guy. But he's not putting away guys with his own clear shots, which his dad was doing at this stage. So, but then again, I think his combinations are a bit smoother than his dad's, and so he's in some ways he's a little bit more developed. In other ways, he's sort of behind the curve. So, he is his own man, and strange given the mannerisms and the similarities, ring walks, and the things that they set out to achieve. Very different, but albeit in marginal ways as you choose to look at it. I also actually watched on Friday night. I watched Mickey Elliott's show on Eurosport.
Right. Okay.
And there was some really good action, and there was a couple of crunching knockouts on there as well. JJ McDonough scored a pretty spectacular knockout of Michael Nirioda, and then there was a German boxer on there, Arthur Herman, who beat Norbert Seekers, and that was a crunching knockout as well. So, really, when you watch boxing on TV, you kind of want the highlight reel stuff, and Mickey certainly got it on that big show on Eurosport. Elsewhere in the issue, we've got stuff about we've got the third part of Nigel Collins' brilliant series on Bernard Hopkins. If you could have been ringside anywhere for any Hopkins fight in history, which fight would you have been at?
The obvious one is Felix Trinidad. I think because it was such an emotional time for America as well, and just that Hopkins was not expected to do what he did. Felix Trinidad was thought to be on a one-way ticket to greatness. Some would argue that he still managed it despite the loss to Hopkins. It was an unforgettable performance, but for me, I think my favourite Bernard Hopkins moment was when he dominated Kelly Pavlik in 2008 or 2009. Brilliant performance from Bernard Hopkins, and that was coming off the back of the loss to Joe Calzaghe, where many felt, and I think Freddie Roach actually went on record as saying, right, no, it's time for Bernard to retire now. And let's not forget what the reputation that Kelly Pavlik went into that fight with. Okay, it wasn't as high as Felix Trinidad's, but he wasn't that far behind either. He was in the pound-for-pound list of the vast majority, and many people were predicting that he'd be the first to stop Bernard Hopkins. And since then, Bernard Hopkins, with the exception of that loss to Chad Dawson, has almost remained on that level.
Okay. You mentioned the Trinidad fight. I was there. I wasn't ringside. I was up in the nosebleeds with Matthew Saad Mohammed, former light heavyweight champion of the world. It was quite possibly one of my most emotional nights at ringside for a number of reasons. Happy to give an early plug to the book because it's in there. It was an amazing night, an amazing performance from Hopkins, from a guy who is a master craftsman, a master in the art of boxing, who used all of Trinidad's strengths, deflected them against himself, and it was entertaining from start to finish. You don't say that about too many Hopkins fights either.
No.
And funny enough, Trinidad and Pavlik, neither of them were the same again after meeting Hopkins, which is no bad feat from Hopkins for sure. And ironically, Hopkins has announced this week that he's going to be fighting Shumanov in April. 2 months later, Trinidad goes into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, yeah.
So Hopkins won't be inducted into the Hall of Fame for a long, long time now, because you need to be retired 5 years. And he's talking about a unification fight early next year when he turns 50, isn't he?
It is. It's crazy. It's crazy to think, logic would tell you that at some point he is going to start, performing as someone of his age should do. He's certainly slowed down, but he remains a world-class champion, one of the finest fighters out there. And he's, as you say, he's not the most thrilling fighter to watch, but you get a certain level of appreciation that you don't get when you're watching other fighters.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the respect for him is enormous, isn't it? Like universal in boxing. People don't have bad things to say about Hopkins the fighter. They just, the level of respect for what he's doing and what he continues to achieve is right up there. So you had a really interesting morning this morning. Let's try and inject a bit of life into this, man.
Yeah.
You're dragging me down.
Well, I'm a bit drained. I haven't eaten. Have I mentioned that?
Oh
and people might think it's like 9 o'clock in the morning. It's not. It's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay.
And I've been up since about 5:30.
All right. Okay. We should download a violin app on the iPad in a minute for you. Okay. So a couple of things.
Yeah.
You were with. Listeners will be interested to know, I'm sure, that you were with none other than Mauricio Sulaiman this morning, the new head of the WBC, the son of the late Don Jose. Mauricio, I actually have high hopes for Mauricio Sulaiman. I've met him a few times over the years in Las Vegas. Most recently, it was before Mayweather Canelo, actually, Matt.
Oh, God.
It was the show called The One, right? It was last year.
Really?
And,
big fight, was it?
Oh, it's tipped you right over the edge, hasn't it? Yeah, it was last year, and anyone who reads the magazine will know I did a big piece on depression, and I met with Mauricio about that, and he's really enthused about trying to do something for the good of boxers about depression and trying to help fighters who suffer with it. I was really encouraged by our talks. And tell me, what did you get out of your time with Mauricio today?
Got a lot. I really did. I mean, we spoke solidly for an hour, a couple of minutes, just under an hour. And I tried to pose a lot of the questions that, the people listening to this would want to be posed. I mean, he's a good guy to talk to. At the same time, he's head of a governing body. He knows if there's a question he doesn't like, he knows how to answer them. There was a question that I asked about Julio Cesar Chavez, and I did try and phrase it differently 3 separate occasions in order to get the answer that I wanted. But I mean, I don't want to take
why he's ranked number 1 by the WBC at super middleweight.
Yeah, when he has never fought there. And he said that he was a former WBC middleweight champion. As we know, he was ordered to fight Rubio, but he could no longer make the weight. He was suspended for a while as well, and then he made it clear that he was going to campaign at super middleweight. Therefore, the WBC put him in their super middleweight rankings, I believe at number 4 or 5. George Groves then made his intentions clear that he was going to challenge Coyle for the IBF and WBA belts. Therefore, Groves lost his mandatory rating with the WBC, and I was told that as really by default, Chavez has moved up the rankings to number 1. Sulaiman accepted my comment that, how can you have somebody at number 1 in a division when he's never fought there? But he wasn't immediately on his computer altering the rankings in front of me.
That would have been a result. That wouldn't have been a result. Let me just go through these rankings with you. Yeah, okay. Well, it did say, guys, look out for Matt's interview with Mauricio, which will be coming up in the magazine in the next few weeks. It does sound like Matt put a lot of the major questions to him, and he certainly opened up lines of communication for ourselves and Mauricio moving forwards. So there might be a time where we actually even have him on the podcast. So that will be interesting. Just in closing, Matt, last subject.
Yeah.
I know that you're getting a little bit peckish. So Floyd Mayweather.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about it the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
He's made his choice. He's fighting Marcos Maidana May the 3rd. Likely 98% sure. A good source in America said 98% sure it's going to Vegas. There's a 2% chance it goes to the Barclays Center in New York, who are desperate for it. Doesn't look like it's going to go there. Still, Mayweather Maidana is on. Are you licking your lips at the prospect of that fight?
No, I'm not. I'm not really. And that's probably, you don't want to knock Marcos Maidana. What he's done recently, you can make a case that he deserves it. He's beaten Adrian Broner, the supposed heir apparent. But the reason I'm not looking forward to it that greatly is because there's very few fighters out there that you sense could give Floyd Mayweather a really good fight. Marcos Maidana is not one of them.
He's had his hands full with some average fighters, hasn't he?
Yeah,
not Floyd.
Yeah, he has. And recently, I think back to the Devon Alexander fight, and Alexander, as gifted as he is, he's no Floyd Mayweather. Maidana is still yet to convince me that he's a fully fledged welterweight. Mayweather has been at that weight and above for a number of years now. You can't question Maidana's punch. Okay, so he's got a puncher's chance. You need more than a puncher's chance when you're going in against Floyd Mayweather.
You say you can't question his punch. I haven't got the stats in front of me, but I've got a feeling you can question his punch maybe as a welterweight.
Yeah, no, that's
I'm
fair.
not sure he's brought up the same firepower. Do you know what? I think, I don't really want it to get this political, particularly after the note that we started off on. Politics do drain you in this sport substantially, but this is the way dream scenario. You put Kell Brook against Amir Khan on in a stadium in the UK. You put Mauricio Maidana on in a stadium in Argentina. You televise them, put them on the same bill, televise them together, one after the other. The winner of Maidana Mauricio fights the winner of Brook and Khan, and then the winner of that gets Mayweather at the end.
Yeah, in an ideal world, that'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be nice? I mean, that if that's the way that boxing worked, it would be a better sport. There's absolutely no denying it. You say, we have got to be careful to kind of steer clear of politics a little bit because it's a murky area.
Well, it's not even that. I mean, the theme of the podcast is that we really stick to the boxing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It would be. Yeah, that would be an ideal scenario. But for me, the way that Mayweather has gone about this whole thing, it's hard not to have some sympathy for Amir Khan. I know he's got his haters, Amir Khan, but the way this whole thing was conducted by Floyd Mayweather, it kind of smacks a little bit of like WWE tomfoolery, and I don't like that. And even when you've got, even on the Monday night, I think it was, or possibly Tuesday, whenever it was, when we've got this big announcement, Leonard Ellerby is okay, everybody stand by, and then for the next hour and a half, you've got Floyd Mayweather posting various things to his Shots account or his Instagram account, and it wasn't funny. It wasn't. But Mayweather can do this. He can
spoken like a real man who was staying up till 1:30 to put the story up on the website.
Well, it's it was frustrating. Maybe my ribs would have been smashed if it was 1 p.m. as opposed to 1 a.m. Maybe I'd have found all that hilarious. But I didn't, and I just think it's just. To me, this whole thing has left a slightly bitter taste.
I think the way this has left the bitterest taste for me is Mayweather was so sort of you guys decide who I fight, and then they decide through the poll that you choose, and he doesn't listen and he fights someone else.
Yeah,
he fights the guy that doesn't win the poll.
Yeah,
that's the main thing that I don't understand. It's like, why even bother giving anyone the choice if you're going to do something else entirely?
Well, exactly, and I think you made the point perfectly in the blog that we posted the day after the announcement, in that perhaps Khan, by kind of alluding to the fact that he'd already got the fight by telling various people that he'd signed a contract, that Mayweather thought, well, hang on, you're not announcing this. This is for me to do. I'll show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to fight the guy that you just beat in the poll and the guy that you beat in the ring 3 years ago. perhaps. Maybe that's it. I mean, you can't get inside the mind of Floyd Mayweather. Big fan of Floyd Mayweather, by the way, with what he does in the ring. Brilliant fighter. But this whole thing just, you know, I'm kind of ready to move on now. Okay, I'm ready to move on from this. But I'm presuming Mayweather is going to win a decision. Probably 120, 108 across the board. Let's move on and see what happens next.
I think some food happens next, doesn't it? Okay, all right, guys. We're going to let Matt off the hook now. Matt, thanks for joining me as always. Hopefully we'll be back together again next week. I know the podcast will be out next week. We might have a special guest. We'll have to see. In the meantime, thanks for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it. There's been a lot covered today. If you've got any questions for us in the meantime, by the way, if you do hashtag BN opening bell, we'll try and get them answered next week too. Until next time, thanks a lot.
Thank you for watching and listening, and remember to subscribe to us on YouTube. Hit the like button on Facebook. Comment or write a review on iTunes or Google Play. It only takes a minute, and it does loads to help us produce shows like these.